Advice about how to be happy and achieve well-being is everywhere, but as a philosopher, I'm interested in the deep justification for this advice. What's the recipe that pulls together all the ingredients? I think the recipe for well-being is value fulfillment. The specifics vary from person to person, more salt for some, more carrots for others, and the best cooks can adjust and improvise to put everything together in the best way. Friends, music, family, dogs, these are some of my ingredients. In my research, I'm exploring how we can help each other succeed in what matters to us so we can be happier humans and better friends. My theory is called the value fulfillment theory of well-being, and the nutshell version of it is that you achieve well-being or live a good human life when you pursue and actualize, realize, or fulfill your values over time. So I think for most people, we value things like family, friendships, meaningful work, developing our skills, some leisure activities. So to live a good life is to succeed in doing those things and having good relationships with your friends and families, and in finding work that you enjoy and that uses your skills, and finding leisure activities that you like to do. And to fit those different values together in your life over time. Probably trying to live my own life is what got me interested in this topic originally. I think everybody thinks about what it is to live a good life. Because I'm a philosopher, I'm probably more inclined to reflect on these questions than some people are. What drew me to the value fulfillment approach in particular is there's a really popular theory in philosophy and in economics that's called a desire satisfaction theory. And that theory says to live well is to get what you want, basically. And I thought, well, there's lots of things I want that are not necessarily part of my well-being. Like I really want there to be a popcorn-flavored Jelly Belly in the jar when I go to a place that has a big jar full of jelly beans. That's not really part of a good life for me. It's just this silly random little desire. So I started thinking, well-being has to be about fulfilling things that are more important than just desires. And that's what got me thinking about people's values. And I think people identify with their values. Those are the things, like if you ask someone about their values, those are the things that people themselves take to be, the contributors to their well-being. If I think about what I want other people to gain from my research, what I want them to get out of the work, it sort of depends on which other people you're thinking about. So I work collaboratively with some psychologists, and I've been very interested in what's going on in psychological research on happiness and well-being. And I think I have some ideas. I think some of the value fulfillment ideas are actually helpful to psychologists. I think it helps make sense of the great variety of things that psychologists measure. The things that they measure, which they take to be part of well-being, are things that we value. And I think that's the sort of deep explanation for why those things are important. If I think about just people who might, come across my book or see a podcast, or I guess you hear podcasts, see a video or hear a podcast about my work. One of the ideas that I hope people understand and digest is an idea I develop in a recent book that I wrote about the importance of humility in friendship. So one of the topics I talk about in that book is how to be a helpful friend. And if you think that to be helpful is to help another person pursue their values, humility becomes very important. It becomes very important to recognize that other people have different values from the ones you have. Even when we have the same values as another person, we don't always interpret them in the same way. So for me, career success might mean, becoming a professor and publishing a book. But for someone else, career success might mean climbing up the ladder and becoming very high up in the administration or making a lot of money. So all people, or most people, value something to do with work, but people think about what it means to succeed in different ways. And I think if you want to be a helpful friend, it's really important to have some acknowledgement that there are these differences between us. And not just an acknowledgement, not just humility about the differences, but also humility in your approach, so that you're not saying, oh, you value friendship, so you must value it exactly the way I do, and now I'm going to tell you what to do because I know everything about what it's like to be you. So I think that's one of the, just in my own experience of friendship, it's been one of the most important things that I've learned from this work, is that humility makes friendships better, and I hope that's one of the things other people get out of it as well. For one thing, in my Intro to Ethics class, a lot of people who teach Intro to Ethics jump right into moral theories where you're talking about the right thing to do. And ever since I started working on well-being and happiness, I actually start the course. In fact, the whole first half of the course is on well-being and happiness. So we have a week on, is a happy life a life of pleasure? Is a happy life the life in which you get everything you want? Is happiness just freedom from suffering? And we talk about Buddhism a little bit and the Stoic philosophy. So that's one way. And students, I find students really, really like it. I often get feedback that at the end of the semester where students say, I thought I knew what happiness was. I thought it was obvious. And then I found out that there's all these different theories about it, and they enjoy it. In the writing a book process, if we just focus on that, it looks like me sitting at the computer with coffee writing. There is some action because I have a treadmill desk at home. So sometimes I am walking while I am typing. But the actual writing process is a big part of it in philosophy, writing and rewriting and reading things, but a lot of that reading I do online. But I think there's a broader picture as well that's important, at least for my research in philosophy. So I think one of the things that philosophy offers the world is a kind of synthesizing of lots of information that's out there, in a kind of clear and logical, organized way. So when it comes to topics like well-being and happiness and virtue, which is another topic I sometimes write about, there's a tremendous amount of information about these topics from the history, 2,000-year history of philosophy, and now coming from psychology, anthropology, economics, all over the map. So for me, it's important to learn as much as I can about what's happening in other academic environments, in other academic programs of research. And there are different ways of doing that. One way is to read the scholarly articles that those other researchers write. But that's pretty difficult to be a kind of expert in all these different fields. So I actually find that talking to the researchers themselves is a kind of better, more efficient way of getting up to speed and finding out what else there is to know besides what I know as a philosopher. So I go to conferences, and I try to go to a lot of interdisciplinary conferences. I go to, I have a friend here in the Institute for Child Development who has a weekly lab meeting that I try to go to every week. I meet with other psychologists here at the U, and just talk to them, buy a psychologist a beer and find out what they think about personality or what they think about happiness. I'm involved in some international organizations that bring scholars on different topics together on these topics of well-being and happiness, and I learn a tremendous amount going to those meetings and those conferences. So that's not the writing process. That's not, I can't write and go to a conference at the same time. But all of that, I try to let that infuse what I'm thinking about the topic, so that when I go to sit at my desk and type, I'm informed by that broader perspective, and I try anyway to let it influence what I say as a philosopher. I can think of one pivot and one surprise. So in my earlier research that came out of my dissertation, I was very much focused on the individual person and how to live your own life. And, it's probably because I was young and thinking about myself and my life and how to live it. And because that was my focus, it was very individualistic. I actually shied away from the word well-being because I thought, oh, that sounds like something you say when you're talking about someone else. Like, are they doing well? But in the context of just thinking about everything from the first person point of view, I said, well, I'm just talking about what it is to do a good job living your own life. Like, how should you think about your life? And then at some point, I realized, well, no, I'm actually talking about these topics that other people are talking about. I've just been talking about them from a different perspective. And so then I wrote the next book where I embraced the concept of well-being. And I said, no, it really is about well-being. I needed to do some work to translate the individual story from the story about well-being for people in general. But that was, it maybe doesn't sound like much of a pivot, but it was in my process. And then the surprise, as I worked more with the psychologists, especially Colin DeYoung here in the Department of Psychology at the U, I had always thought that things that are values, like well-being is something that's valuable, it's something that's good. I'd always thought it's not possible to give a fully psychological explanation of that thing, because I thought there's a difference between the facts and the values, and we have to preserve that division. And so the more I talked to psychologists, especially Colin, about how similar our theories were and how much they kind of overlapped each other, the more surprising I found the results. The more I thought that I'm not sure I was right in the way I was thinking about it before. I still am not sure how to think about the division. It's not that I think now there's no division between facts and values. I still think there is, but I think it's a lot more complicated than I thought it was before. And I also think there's a lot more overlap than I thought before. So I know I need a different answer to that question now, and that's been surprising, because I thought I had it all figured out in grad school. One of the things that has been a really nice surprise to me, that has to do with why the research I'm doing is maybe important, is the response that I've had actually to both of my books on the response I've had from therapists. So the book that came out over a decade ago called The Reflective Life, I had a lot of nice emails from therapists who said, your book is really helpful to us and to what we're doing and how we're trying to help our patients. And then the recent book, the Value Fulfillment book, I've just been having a long exchange with a professor of psychiatry in Texas who said, this book is really useful for us because we are trying to think about how our patients have different values from us, the therapists, and we need to negotiate these differences between their values and our values. We're supposed to be neutral, but what does that mean? And I, in my book, have written about how to help friends. I'm not talking about a therapeutic relationship, but as any woman knows, close friendships are often kind of therapeutic sometimes when people have serious problems. So this psychiatrist really thought that that work was helpful in thinking about how therapists should engage with their patients. So I'm excited about that. I think that might be another thing that I am interested in working on in the future. A lot of my attention has been on developing this theory of well-being, this value fulfillment theory. And what I want to do next is think about what my approach to well-being has to say about ill-being. So I want to turn from happiness to suffering, I guess, which doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but there's some interesting philosophical questions about what it is for life to go really badly. Can a life ever be so bad that it's not worth living? Those kinds of questions. I'm interested to see whether the value fulfillment approach kind of transfers over to the bad side of life. I'm not sure exactly how that will go, but I've been starting to write some things about that. And the other thing is that I want to keep pursuing these collaborative projects with psychologists. So I have a colleague here at Minnesota who he and I have been working together to kind of put together an empirical theory of personality with my value fulfillment theory of well-being. I have a colleague at George Mason University who's looking at applying my theory to work-life balance questions in industrial organization psychology. So that's an exciting avenue for me to think about how the theory I've developed can be, feed into the work that psychologists are doing. There are a bunch of little questions about ill-being that I'd like the answers to. So, is there a 0 point? How does ill-being work? Is it just sort of all on a scale? You do better, less better, less well, less well, less well, less well, until you're really doing badly? Or is there some kind of switch that flips where up from this point up you're doing well and from this point down you're doing badly? I know it's kind of abstract, but I'd really like to know. I guess what I want to know is there a 0 point, or is it just all a continuous line of better and worse? I'd like the answer to that question. I'm going to figure it out.